So this video is about rotator cuff tears. Now, we see rotator cuff tears and ruptures of the rotator cuff quite a lot, and there's this kind of assumption that maybe we should do surgery on these because they're not going to come back together being separate. And this is all down to thinking a little bit too much like tendons are like your Achilles tendon around the shoulder, and they don't orientate that way. They're not like just one cord attached to the bone and separate from anything else. They're basically all intertwined. There's actually like a connection that runs between them all, and this is sort of called the cable. And then in the other side of it, where a lot of tears do occur, is in the crescent area, which basically is like a bit of connective tissue almost in that area. And what this means is, and we see this all the time, is that a rupture of a rotator cuff tendon doesn't necessarily mean that you lose function or that you can't gain function back with rehab. And we do see this. You see some people sometimes where they've got a rotator cuff rupture, but they can move their arm fully. And therefore you think, how do they manage to do that? And then there's other people who, you know, have got the same rotator cuff or another rotator cuff rupture, and they can't move their arm out to the side. It just won't go. You can passively lift it, but actively there's nothing going. And what's interesting is why is this? Now, this piece of research was done and it sheds light into this. Obviously, firstly, because we can see that there's this interconnection between them all, which means if one goes, technically the others can still be attached and still exert movement and force around the glenohumeral joint, around the shoulder joint, which can then support it and give it movement and function as well. What this study looked at though was whether or not the function or restoration without surgery was possible. And what they looked at was, you know, what it took in terms of tears, where the tears were, and the extensiveness of the tears in terms of the likelihoods of regaining function without surgery. And what they found is that if you have massive rotator cuff ruptures that are more anterior at the front of the shoulder, then basically they don't tend to do quite as well in non-operative rehab. Posterior ones seem to do very well with rehab, and it's probably because most of the supporting of the joint is where there's forward translation of the joint. So of course there's more problematic issues with regards to that if there's lack of support at the front. But basically they found that you need probably about 3 different tendons involved in the rupture to actually definitely start to think, this is looking like it's going to have to be surgery. And even then, some people did actually still get better with rehab, even in that kind of condition. And what this means is you've got to have quite a lot of tears in multiple tendons to really start to think that maybe rehab might not work. But even then, it is still possible. And what this shows you is if you rupture it, you don't want to necessarily jump straight into surgery because it may well do well. And the other thing is that surgery isn't necessarily always that effective in the longer term. A lot of tendons are torn because of degeneration, which means the tissue quality is not so good. So if you just knit back bad tissue together, it's not very strong, therefore it's easy to rip again. But if you rehab the area, you build up tissue resilience through, you know, the effect of adaptability that you get, which means you can make tendons in a better condition, and that means then it's more likely to have a more longer term effect. So rehab is still very much looking like a very good option, even in what seem to be pretty bad rotator cuff tears or ruptures. And like I say, you've got to have multiple, anterior ones are worse, but you know, because of the interconnections between all of them or most of them, it means that they don't necessarily mean by rupturing even 1 or 2 of them that you can't regain function or you even lose it in the first place. But anyway, that's it for this video, and I'll see you next time.